Hello, this is NEMYRIALIVE, and we continue our broadcasting from Kiev. And we are very happy that our guest today is Ambassador Pankaj Saran. He is a former Deputy National Security Advisor for India and former ambassador to Russia and former High Commissioner to Bangladesh. He currently serves as the convoy of the strategic think tank NatStrat and is a member of India's National Security Advisory Board. Mr. Ambassador, hello, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador, I prepared too many questions for today's interview. Sorry for that, but let's start.
Sure.
Thank you. Let's start from multipolarity. I know that you say about multipolarity many times. I have read your works and your interviews. Today, we often hear that the world has become truly multipolar. But how do you assess multipolarity? Is this a chance for a balance, or it is a threat to stability?
I think it's both. It is an option that leads to more balance, but it is also an option that could potentially lead to more instability. The fact is that today we are witnessing the emergence of a new kind of an international system in which the domination of the United States after 1991 and in the middle of the last century is being challenged by China, particularly, but also by other powers in the world. So, at a minimum, what we are seeing is the United States as the dominant power, which still it is, but also being very, very seriously challenged by China. So, in any case, we have two powers that are competing for global supremacy or domination. But in addition, we also have a more assertive set of other actors. For example, the European Union, Russia, and you can argue that India is also emerging, say, in the last 10 to 20 years. So I think we are heading to a more, let's say, distributed power structure in the world, although at the moment, it is clear that despite this distribution of power and emergence of new powers who are struggling to emerge, pretty much the United States remains the most powerful nation on earth. And I think the project today in the United States is to preserve that international domination. And we are not very clear yet how it is going to interact and deal with the China challenge. We are seeing elements of both contestation, cooperation, confrontation. So the jury is still out as to how this fundamental relationship is going to play out. But in the absence of that, and keeping that aside, I think it is quite clear that other powers are also making their presence felt and asserting their opinions and their interests. That's what I would say.
Ambassador, let me continue our discussion about the balance between US and China a little bit later, and I would speak a little bit about new orders, world orders. Do you think that instead of a one single world order, now we see the appearance of many different world orders? And they may coexist simultaneously?
Well, the concept of globalization or a globalized world is under severe challenge. I think that is quite evident, and it has different origins. But the trend to fragment and to set up barriers on the economic, on the trade, on the technology fronts and domains is quite evident. That is happening, and I think we are at a stage today where everyone is looking out for himself. So the idea that we are a big united world is under severe threat. Now, from a strategic point of view, a geopolitical point of view, if we are to examine where we are, the question is, yes, despite this fragmentation, there is a certain degree of interdependence in the sense that there are countries who are operating in their regions, but they're also drawing lessons from what is happening in other regions of the world where they are not present. And there is also evidence to show that developments in one region of the world are having an impact on other regions of the world. So that interconnectedness between different regions of the world is still very much there. So, for example, if you look at the Indo-Pacific, if you look at Europe, if you look at Africa, if you look at Latin America, all of these are functioning and they have their own rhythm and their own internal dynamics. I mean, the dynamics in Europe, let us say, where you are located, is very different from the dynamic in the Indo-Pacific. Now, the question is whether and how much these two are linked. So, as I said, actors in both regions are watching, are drawing lessons, and to a certain extent, there is interdependence. So, it's a little complicated, but on balance, I would say we are heading to a more fragmented world in which universal norms, universal rules are under severe challenge.
Is it possible, instead of multipolar world, say non-polar world, of overlapping alliances and tactical coalitions?
Well, as I said, I mean, look, I think the United States still is by far the most consequential and most powerful nation on earth. The gap in all senses of national power between the United States and the rest is still fairly large. So I would say it still has to be regarded as one pole of the world. So you cannot say that the world is non-polar. I think it has poles. I think the second pole, which is emerging very fast, is China. So at a minimum, one could argue that we are already at an era of at least two poles that are emerging in the world, and I don't see them going anywhere. So for the next couple of decades, this I think is going to be the defining framework for the international system. When you talk about tactical alliances or other interests, that I agree with you is going to be the way forward. If you just look at, for example, the Western Alliance, I mean, the oldest alliance in the world after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it is facing its gravest crisis today between the transatlantic partners. So, although they have and they share similar values, their interests are diverging. And that divergence is become a real challenge on how to maintain that Western unity, both in terms of the military capability, but also in terms of their economic interests and their strategic interests. So what we are seeing, therefore, is a greater room for maneuver, because if the alliance system is weakening, then every actor feels he has greater room for maneuver, not just within his own alliance, but also vis-a-vis different countries. So you may have a situation where, let us say, a member of the NATO alliance, the Western alliance, pursues different kinds of policies towards China while remaining a part of the Western alliance. You may have a European country who might pursue a slightly softer approach to China than, for example, the United States. So, yes, there will be, in a sense, paradoxically and ironically, we might be entering into an era of greater autonomous decision making and nations not being circumscribed by their alliance allegiances. In any case, the alliance system is under stress because the only alliance worth its name today in the world is the Western alliance. I mean, there is no real other alliance. I don't agree that we can call the Russia-China relationship an alliance. So there is actually no other real alliance system that is robust or active or powerful. So everyone seems to be, acting increasingly on his own. And I think the Trump administration exemplifies this tendency to pursue clear-cut national goals and interests, often with little respect or regard for alliance commitments.
You say that each country is now on its own. What does it mean for countries like India that seek to maintain the independence of foreign policy?
It's both good and bad. It's good because countries and nations now better appreciate the Indian school of thought or the Indian approach to the international system, where India always maintained ever since its independence that we need to have the flexibility and the ability to be our own masters in terms of our own decision making. So there was always a premium in Indian strategic thought on the idea of autonomy as understood in a very simple way in terms of the ability to take decisions on their merits, keeping in mind, of course, values are important, but also interests. So in that sense, the way we are moving forward today is good for India because it is a validation and a vindication of what India has been saying for the last 7 decades. It also opens up more room for India, more flexibility, more maneuverability to deal with individual powers, different regions, without the burden of binary relationships between countries. So the field is opening. And when the field opens, as in football, then you have a greater chance of success. What is bad about this whole development is obviously that the hit is being taken, or the casualty of all of this is, in some senses, a breakdown of the predictability and the stability of an international system as enshrined in the United Nations and other international organizations. So that is the downside of a situation where we seem to be entering a period where what we had assumed was the foundational basis for nation states to deal with each other, that to some extent is floundering. So that brings in unpredictability, that brings in a bit of lawlessness into the system, and that adds to the risk, the level of risk involved in conducting international relations. So no one likes all this uncertainty and risk because nations want to have some sense of transparency and stability. So I've told you both what is the good part of it and also what is the downside.
Ambassador, you say that India tried to maintain strategic autonomy. How it is possible to balance relationship with United States, Russia, China, and the global South at the same time? I think it is quite complicated.
It is. It is complicated, and I think any Indian will agree and accept the proposition that this is a difficult path to choose, because an easier path, for the sake of argument, could be that India decides to pitch itself and cast itself with one or the other of these powers that you named, either the United States or Russia or China. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is that in India's interest? Number one. Number two, is that practical at all? That can India, for example, let us say, become a part of the Western alliance? Can India be some kind of an alliance partner to NATO or to the West? Or can India, for example, be, hitch its bandwagon to Russia or to China? So it's easy to argue that, perhaps India should make a choice. But in practical terms, it is not going to work that way, because India's interests are fairly transparent, fairly well known. And I think the way India is doing it is to use its partnerships with major powers and other players in such a way that we advance India's own national interests. So if I have certain interests to pursue with the United States, I would seek to do that. If I have certain interests to pursue with Russia, I will seek to do that. If I have certain interests to pursue with China, I would do that. Now, of course, there may be contradictions between pursuing these interests with these different countries. So the management of these contradictions is what preoccupies a lot of Indian foreign policy. And so this is the way the Indian mind is looking at the world. But let me also add that it is not just a question of a very narrow pursuit of interests. There are also values that are inherent in the Indian approach. There are certain values that we espouse, that we share, and we would like to promote in the world. So those are also part and parcel of our approach. So broadly speaking, I would say India is looking upon the international system in a more eclectic, more broad-minded fashion. We have never believed that the world needs to be divided into iron caste alliances. And India has different personalities, different interests, which it needs to meet. It has different goals. So a lot of the Indian foreign policy, by the way, is driven by our own national and domestic objectives, which are also fairly transparent. So that's broadly how I would answer your question.
Ambassador, where do you see lies the lines between multi-alliance policy and the risk of being drawn into geopolitical crossfire?
Yeah, I mean, look, there is a risk, of course. You have to be careful. I mean, as I said, India has chosen the difficult path. So there is a multi-alliance scenario, there is a crossfire scenario, and I think we have witnessed bits of both in the last few years, where we have been caught between these two situations, let's say, especially on the Ukraine war, and in some other occasions, even on the case of Iran. So these are things which we have to manage, we have to handle. It requires a lot of effort, because we have to explain ourselves better. We have to communicate our positions better to remove misunderstandings, and also to be careful in what we say, in what we do. So yes, it requires a higher level I would say, of diplomatic skill than would normally be the case. We cannot hide behind the comfort of an alliance or a leader of an alliance. Here, India is an alliance of one, and therefore you are the leader and the follower, and therefore you have to be much more alert.
Ambassador, what do you think how India could become a active actor to creating a new world order and a new framework for dialogue, for global dialogue?
You see, we took this initiative a couple of years ago to bring the countries of the global south together. The idea was that we provide a platform where the interests and the priorities of the vast majority of the countries can be articulated. So that was one attempt at bringing to the top of the pile on the table the concerns of the marginalized or the weak or those whose voice is not being heard as much as it should. But if you ask me whether India can shape the new global order, in practice and in theory, yes, India can become a participant. We have more capabilities and more equities today, let us say, than we had when we became independent in 1947. But we also have to be practical and realistic about what are our capabilities. We cannot pretend to have more influence than we actually have. So there are areas where India can make a difference, and there are areas which India cannot make a difference because power is unevenly distributed in the world. That's the nature of global politics. So we understand our limitations, but we are also more aware of our strengths. And I think you will see India participating more and more actively rather than passively in international forums on international issues. And I think today it is more or less agreed that for any solution to any international or transnational challenge or problem, you cannot find one without the participation of India, number one. And number two, that a solution-based approach by India is becoming more common than before. So these are the ways in which India has been, for example, as I told you, there are some values which we believe are for the global good: democracy, pluralism, an open, transparent polity, our soft values of peace, of even, for example, the practice of yoga, the approach which we are bringing into the climate change discussion is quite remarkable. The approach that India is bringing to the climate discussion is not one of, let us say, confrontation, but one of putting forward a lifestyle which reduces carbon footprint. And so there are many other examples on how India can shape. Now, people ask, what happens to the Security Council? How long can India remain out of the UN Security Council? I think those are issues. But what India is showing in the last few years is that even if it is not being admitted into the Security Council, it is participating fairly actively in other forums, in other platforms, in other sectors, and contributing to decision making, to international standards, etc. So, short of a formal reform of the post-World War II institutions, India is doing everything else. in terms of global governance.
Ambassador, now we have a big war in Ukraine. What do you think? How this big war changed the international system?
I think the war has had a major impact on the international system. It has challenged the ideas of sovereignty, of territorial integrity, of the rules-based order. It has also brought to the fore the whole question of what you mean by security, whose security, how do you ensure security for all sides, and what is the linkage between security and sovereignty and peace. I think, but my own view is that the Ukraine conflict is very much part of or is an aftershock of the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. In 91, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, not a single bullet was fired, not a single shot was fired. 30 years later, we are seeing that those old wounds have now suddenly erupted. So it's a very difficult, complex situation with no easy solutions. The only solution which can emerge is through dialogue and diplomacy, the use of force. Again, the idea of what is war, what is force, has also emerged as a result of this. You have now differences being made between conventional wars, conventional military campaigns, and hybrid wars, non-traditional uses of force. So what the Ukraine war has taught us is that all of this has now come together. And at the heart of it is the question of how two neighboring countries can coexist in a manner in which neither feels threatened from the other. And what is this new compact that can be arrived at? Because the old compact seems to have broken. So I personally believe that the recent initiatives taken by the US president to move towards a peace solution is very good. It is very difficult. No one is denying that. But at least there is a small window of opportunity opened by the Americans. And I think that window should be grabbed. I mean, that opportunity should be grabbed, because if you lose this opportunity now, I don't know what will be the consequence of it in the future.
Ambassador, India has taken a relatively restrained position on the war in Ukraine. And how do you explain this stance?
I think the Indian position, in many ways is reflective of the position taken by the vast majority of the international community. If you keep aside the countries of the European Union and the NATO alliance, and if you keep aside Russia and its own immediate allies, then you're talking about at least another 140, 150 countries. India is part of those. And I think all of them, in my opinion, have taken a somewhat similar stand, which is basically no one wants this war to continue. Everyone wants this war to end through dialogue and diplomacy. People are reluctant to allow this war to engulf the whole world. They do not want another third world war. India has, paradoxically, good relations with all sides, with the Americans, the Europeans, with the Russians. We can talk to everyone. We can, go to any capital, and we are treated as partners and as friends. This is a great asset for India. And which is why we have taken the kind of position we have, where we are saying, let's talk peace, let's talk diplomacy, and we have different interests, both in Europe and in the US and in Russia. So this is one of the reasons why India has taken the position it has. In any case, I think India does not want to fan the flames of war. India wants to be a part of reducing the tensions globally. We are not mediating like some other countries, but we are also talking to everyone, all sides, counseling and suggesting to everyone about what we think is the way forward. And it looks to me that after 2.5 years of fighting, we seem to be moving, we seem to be entering a phase of talking to each other, of some kind of diplomatic activity. And I think India would always encourage and hope, both encourage as well as hope, that these efforts, howsoever small and howsoever difficult they are, they succeed. Because from the Indian point of view, I would only say to you that yes, Russia shares a border with Europe, it shares a border with Ukraine. It is the Europeans feel threatened by Russia, and Russia also, of course, feels threatened by the NATO alliance and the NATO expansion of the last 30 years. So that's okay. But from an Indian point of view, it is also important to keep in mind that our immediate and more pressing strategic challenge is not from Russia or from Europe, it is from China. And what we want is that we have an international agreement or a consensus that among our friends that China is the challenge of the future. And that is something we have to focus on.
You say that India have good relationship with all sides. Moreover, since the full-scale Russian invasion, Prime Minister Modi has met both with Putin and with President Zelensky. And when you say about the dialogue, does it mean that India have a vision of how to bring this war to the end? Does it mean that dialogue is a mean to stop this war?
Unlike some other countries, India has not put forward any peace plan. We have not put forward any peace proposal. If you have noticed in the last 3 years, and this is very careful, this is very deliberate. India has not gone into prescription of this is what we think both sides should do. So what has India done then? What India has instead done is we have spoken where it needs to be spoken. So, for example, when India went to the Swiss-sponsored peace conferences early this year or last year, we participated, but we also made it clear to the participants and to the Swiss and to the Ukrainian side that, look, you cannot expect to have a peace deal or a peace agreement without the presence of Russia. So, and to the Russians, we have said that you must enter into a dialogue and a discussion with Ukraine. So, what India has been trying to do is to use its friendship with the leaders of all sides to exert some kind of pressure or some kind of a message that, we think the only way possible is dialogue and diplomacy. And sometimes, when tensions are running high, when tempers are high, emotions are high, it matters hugely if someone comes into the room and helps to calm down the temperature, calms down the emotions. I think that is the kind of role India has been trying to play. India is not, as I said, trying to provoke or to fan the flames of war. But yes, India has also said that, look, if anyone feels that India can play a role, we would be happy to play a role. We are available, but we are also conscious enough of the fact that the parties concerned are so mature and big and powerful, and their systems are so robust that mediation in the classical sense is not something which India believes is the way forward as far as India is concerned. Yes, we have clearly there are other countries who are offering mediation, but finally at the end of the day, it will require both sides to make some compromises.
Ambassador, let's speak a little bit about nuclear deterrence. I think it is a very important question in our days. China is significantly expanding its nuclear arsenal. How does it affect the strategic balance in Asia and India's security?
It is a serious concern. There is no question about it. And I think there was a time when the United States had proposed that China should also now become a part of the US-Russia strategic stability dialogue on the nuclear question. And China has been hesitant and has actually said no. But we believe that the Chinese nuclear weapon program has to be watched, has to be monitored. We cannot have a situation either of vertical proliferation or horizontal proliferation. It is not acceptable. And there has to be a mechanism where restraint, legal restraint, has to be exercised by all nuclear weapon powers. China, the problem is that China says something, it does something else. But the nuclear weapon powers have to lead by example. You cannot have a situation where there is rapid growth of nuclear arsenals in China because it doesn't work like this. Countries respond, nations respond, and then you get into a race, which we have seen during the Cold War, and we don't want that kind of a race to start. So it is an issue, and it has to be addressed seriously before it is too late.
Ambassador, there is a long-standing conflict between India and Pakistan, and both possess nuclear weapons. And what role does the nuclear factor play in this dynamic? And we remember that a couple of weeks ago, we saw the new tensions, and it is very interesting what nuclear factors matter, how it's matter.
So look, let's keep the nuclear thing aside. I mean, look, Russia is nuclear, NATO is nuclear, everyone's nuclear, China is nuclear. So that's not really the issue. Just because you are a nuclear power does not mean that you stop defending yourself or you stop taking action to kind of against those who are out to destroy your security. The right to defend and the right to take action against anyone who has inimical designs against you remains whether or not you're a nuclear power. So this belief that just because they have a nuclear weapon program, India is a nuclear weapon state, that I have no option but to ignore the threats to India's security, that proposition is not valid and will not be acceptable to India. The fact is that the Pakistani state is operating on two basic principles. One, of course, is their nuclear program. The other is the use of terrorism as a deterrence against India, which has almost no difference between the state and the terror groups. So in the sense that the Pakistani army itself is actually the mastermind, and it uses these terror groups as non-traditional, asymmetric tools vis-a-vis India. So what we saw in the last few weeks was a very fundamental shift in India's security doctrine, where the doctrine is simple that if there is a terrorist attack in India, and if it is traced back to Pakistan, then India will retaliate against those terror camps or those terror groups or the masterminds, and we will go for the head of the snake, not just for the foot soldiers, but those who are at the head of it, because of the fact that we've lived through this for the last 40 years. And we've tried everything, diplomacy, all options have been tried, peaceful dialogue, everything, nothing seems to be working. So the doctrine which is now in force is that we will see either the Pakistanis address the terrorism problem on their own, they dismantle the infrastructure, or if they are not prepared to do it, then someone else has to do it. So if it is a question of defending myself, unfortunately, I will have to do it.
Ambassador, last years, the role of Global South increased dramatically. By the way, what term you suggest to use when we speak about the country of Global South? Does you use a term Global South in India? It's interesting question, because we use in Europe we use this, but how use this term in India? And next question is, what do you think is what will be the future of countries of Global South, and what will be the future of BRICS as well?
Look, I would suggest that we don't use the word Global South in its literal form. It's more as a figure of speech. It's more of a concept rather than an organization which has a concrete membership. Of course, there are countries who associate with the Global South, but this is more, in my view, the idea of bringing together countries from the developing world, countries who feel that their interests are not being taken into account in the middle of all the wars that are going on, that there are issues which are of importance to them, basically relating to economic development, to put it in simple terms, which need to be looked at, whether it is sustainable development, economic growth, international fairness in trade, in a fair international order, economic, etc. So in India, of course, we use the term, to answer your question, Global South, but we don't sit and count, which countries are members. Sometimes we know approximately. Now it's a group of self-selected countries. So countries who on their own associate themselves with the concept and with the idea of the Global South, they participate and they come. But it is not a membership driven, it's not an organization, there's no secretariat, there's nothing. It's just a turn of phrase, and it represents a sort of a common agenda, if I may say so, of issues that are of importance. And that's about it. It is not intended to be some kind of a negotiating trade union, either against the West or the East or the North. But it's just a platform. As far as the BRICS is concerned, again, it's an old organization. The first summit of BRICS was held in 2009. So we're now, 16 years or more, maybe, into the BRICS process. Last year or so, it has expanded quite a lot. More countries want to join it. So we have to ask ourselves, what is in it, and why is it that more countries want to join BRICS? I mean, there must be some reason. Just as, the example is given that why do more and more countries want to join NATO? You have to ask yourself why. Similarly, you should ask yourself, why do more and more countries want to join BRICS? If it is such a ineffective organization, then why should countries want to join it? So I think there is some merit, there are some pluses and advantages of BRICS, but every country has a different vision of BRICS. India's vision of BRICS is different from China's, is different from Russia's. So we bring our own vision, our own perspectives of BRICS. We don't see this as a trade union. We don't see this as an anti-West organization. We just see this as a group of, let's say, non-Western countries, but we don't see this as being some kind of a platform for drumming up anti-West position, globally speaking. We have different political systems, but initially, in the initial period, it was driven by economics. It was not supposed to be political. The future of BRICS depends a lot, not just on the membership of BRICS, but also on the international atmosphere and how the world proceeds. But I think BRICS is there to stay. It's not going to disappear. It will continue its work. How much it actually contributes will depend a lot on its membership, on consensus within the BRICS grouping. There are differences, even, for example, on, let's say, a BRICS currency. I don't think India is talking about a BRICS currency at all, but there are others who are keen on it. But if we can benefit through better trading arrangements, access to natural resources, access to markets, we will take that.
Ambassador, thank you so much. Thank you so much to be with us today. Of course, I have more questions for you, but I understand that it's impossible to answer for all questions in one interview. That is why I hope that we will have possibility to continue your interview in nearest future. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. A pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much.